thank you.
Hello, everybody, and thank you so much for joining us for this afternoon session, 21st Century Trade Routes, Boosting Equitable Global Commerce. I'm Elise Labott of CNN, and joining me are His Excellency Franck Riester, Minister of Defense, Delegate for Foreign Trade and Economic Attractiveness of France, and Don Graves, Deputy Secretary of Commerce from the United States. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. Good to be here.
Thank you.
Well, obviously, COVID-19 really upended, I think, how we look at trade. The pandemic has been a consequence of international trade and globalization, with the virus spreading along established trade routes, budgetary shortfalls as a result of reduced tariffs and taxes, general decline in economic activity leading in many cases to recessions, threats to social safety net. We could go on here. And then we talk about the trade disruptions really impairing the production of goods and dependent on imports. So that really affects the supply chain. So we're really kind of in a new era here. I might add this meeting is very timely as the leaders of their two countries, President Macron and US President Biden, will meet this week in Rome, and obviously trade will be high on that agenda. Franck, let's start by talking about this inflection point of COVID. Brought to international trade, policies are being changed as we speak. What kind of methods are you pursuing to help strengthen global trade in the post-COVID environment?
Thank you very much. Yes, the COVID-19 crisis has highlighted our vulnerabilities when it comes to value chains and supply chains. We saw that during emergencies when we had some problems in the supply chains about personal protective equipment, for instance, but it's also the case during the recovery when we see some disruptions in the supply chains, in the value chains. And so we really need to rethink the supply chains and to implement policies so that we could be less dependent. And for instance, in the EU, we have decided to build a kind of strategic autonomy that could help us to be less dependent in very strategic products, strategic sectors, I could say health sector, food, energy, so that we could be less dependent. And there are several means to do so. First, diversifying our suppliers. Second, it's creating some reserves, strategic reserves of products. Third is to support policies in terms of recycling. And fourth kind of solutions is to perhaps rethink the value chains, to relocate the value chains, and to think the value chain differently. And for instance, for Europe, as you know, we are neighbors around the EU, in the Mediterranean Sea, with the GCC. We can build new value chains, less exposed to crises due to pandemics, crises due to geopolitical crisis. You know that trade is more and more used as a weapon to push some countries when it comes to political or economical issues, and they use trade as a weapon. So we have to rethink our value chains in this direction, and we think that the GCC for Europe are really the good partners for that.
Don, we talk about strategic autonomy, and that has a lot of components, but on the trade front, what we're talking about are, people becoming more self-sufficient on their own on trade. And let's start by, COVID has really made us look at the inherent frailty of the supply chain, really. Is there a danger that we shift all of our thinking to localizing the supply chain and autonomy and losing the kind of global connectivity that's been such a a feature of the global trade system that has really increased growth and opportunity?
Well, thank you again, and that's a great question. While I agree with the minister, I also think that he would say, as the French motto of liberté, égalité, and fraternité, we need to make sure that we're engaged as partners around the world. So just as much as we're building up indigenous resilience, strengthening our local supply chains, that also requires making sure that we're investing around the world in partnership. It should be done together. One of the things that has been really at the heart of everything that we've done in the US, and I know in France, is the ability to have predictability and consistency and transparency. And that's really the way that I think that we can make sure that our supply chains continue to be strengthened over the course of the upcoming years, that we really have to focus on ways that not only do we invest at home, but we're investing in partnership around the world, as we've heard already today, bringing many of the communities, many of the countries that have struggled even more heavily than our countries have because of the pandemic, bringing them along as partners and deeply investing in their people, their supply chains. It'll make all of us better.
Let me just follow up with you on that, because I think there are a lot of, there are a lot of issues at play here. Obviously, there are the global issues, then there are the kind of bilateral issues, and then there are the multilateral issues between the US and the EU when we talk about trade. Franck talked about trade being a weapon. We know that President Trump, his America First policies, some call them protectionist, against globalization. But President Biden has left a lot of those tariffs on, not just on China, but on the EU. So how do you balance this challenge to, I think what we've seen in a lot of countries, this kind of domestic nationalism, particularly on the trade issue, versus trade that can, in the end, generate growth, because looking ahead, there will be greater pressure to further liberalize rules on trade to encourage economic recovery.
Well, just building off of what you said, I'd say that President Biden has made it very clear that we're focused on building back better for the world. We heard earlier today that it wasn't just building back, but we have to do it in a way that we're rescuing those who've been left behind. And so, while yes, we need to make sure that we're doing all that we can for our own people, we can't end up in a place of retrenchment. We can't go back to a place where people feel that they need to hold on to the small pieces that they control for themselves and not for others. We have to build back in a way that allows peoples all over the world to have the type of future that they'd like to see. One of the things that I say a lot of the time is that people have hopes and dreams, and really where they want to get to is a life of dignity. It's our job as leaders in our countries and leaders for the globe to provide them the opportunity where they can turn those hopes and dreams into that life of dignity. So I think it's certainly a balancing act of getting it right to make sure that we're doing the things that we need to do for our own countries and our own people, but recognizing that the only way that we can deal with the big changes and challenges that we face of climate change, of systemic inequity, we have to do that in complete partnership with one another.
Well, Franck, let's pick up on that. Pre-COVID, we were having this backlash against globalization. We talked about President Trump's America First policies. So particularly in our country, there was this backlash and this protectionist agenda. Are we past that?
I hope so. I hope so, and all the signals that are sent are going in the good direction of the less tension. And I think that we have, as the EU, with the US, but also with other regions of other countries, we have to resolve our legacy disputes, and we have to address tomorrow's challenges together. And that's the work we do with the US. And when I see the dispute between Boeing and Airbus, when I see the you know, the taxation on digital services, and minimal taxation. When I see the hard work we do with Catherine Tai and all the government in the US and with the EU on steel and aluminium issues, we see that we are going in the good direction. And we are mobilizing much energy for that. To that, sometimes there are some other decisions, and you have all the decision, in your head, that is not going in the good direction, but we have to talk, and we talk, and President Biden and President Macron talk a lot on this direction. And we have some organizations that could ease this kind of work together. Is, for instance, the Tech and Trade Council, where we will work on the different issues that we share with the US, but we share globally. Because in fact, we have to build a new trade environment, more resilient and more sustainable. And the US, the EU, the GCC countries have a major role to play in this direction. And when you see the announcements in terms of climate change fight by the Crown Prince here, you see that it's a global fight against climate change that we have to face and to engage. And we are really committed to find the good decision in bilateral relationship, but also in multilateral level, so that we could build this new trade framework more resilient and more sustainable, thanks to due diligence corporate legislations, but due also to our commitment to modernize, to reform the WTO. And we have, all of us, a major role to play. And in this direction, Saudi Arabia, when it shared the G20, has initiated an important initiative, Riyadh initiative, to reform the WTO. It's a good path in the good direction. And at the beginning of December, with MC12 in Geneva, we'll have to make it a success, because it will be a wonderful signal to our people.
That's right. So Don, I mean, Franck talks about reforming the international trade system, and there is a lot of talk about reforming the WTO. International trade has really done amazing work in lifting millions out of poverty, driving economic growth, and encouraging economic integration that's reduced incentive for armed conflicts. Is this the time, is this the moment for us to address domestic socioeconomic divides and for trade policy to really reflect the notion of economic justice? And how do we make that shift?
I think there's no doubt that we have to do that. And we will do that certainly by addressing our own challenges, but we have to do that in concert with our friends. And as the minister said, we, the US and the EU, are working very closely. And we've been very, very good friends for a long time. And good friends sometimes don't always agree, but we find ways to address the challenges in concert. And we're going to do that. And then we're going to be able to focus on socioeconomic issues across the globe. It's part of the reason that we're so interested in working with our friends here in Saudi Arabia, because of the transformation that's undergoing the kingdom here. We work together in partnership, and we can deal with these challenges. But we have to be mindful and strategic about the way that we do this work, that we can't just choose a path without having thought it through and discussed it as friends do and communicating with one another.
So Franck, we've always considered domestic policies as the most direct way to tackle inequality, but trade constitutes some 60% of global GDP, and it's an important aspect of economic empowerment. And while domestic policies can help with the inequalities created by trade, what types of trade reforms could have a meaningful impact on domestic economic inequality if we're talking about reforming the trade system?
For instance, we work on in the EU on instruments that could help fighting against deforestation, against climate change, thanks some mechanism to help our companies to be at the forefront of the fight against climate change. And we think that we could change the way that the value chains are built so that it could be worthwhile for our domestic market. For instance, when it comes to human rights, forced labor, when it comes to social rights, because we want this new trade framework to be more beneficial for people, for workers, and for the planet.
We've talked about partnerships. What about investment? How is the way you view foreign direct investment change? What are the new pathways to boost commerce in a way that's more sustainable?
Well, as I've been saying, we recognize that to invest globally, we have to do that in concert. No one country can tackle it all, and that's why it's good to have partners who have a consistent view and strategic view of the way that things move forward. My favorite quote from Robert Kennedy is about the great French marshal Riester, who was talking with his gardener about planting a tree in the garden, and his gardener complained about planting it because it was slow growing, it wouldn't mature for 100 years. And the marshal said, then there's no time to waste, we need to plant it now. And that's what we need to do for our capital, to plant it now so that the rest of the world can grow along with us.
Okay, we're out of time, but super quick. We talk about planting trees. We have the greatest farmers in the world here at this conference. What is the one thing you would seek from the global investment community convened here at FII?
That we have to invest more sustainably, and to always think if the investment we make, is going in the good direction for people. If it will be sustainable, if it will be profitable for people and for the planet.
And I would just go back to what I said at the beginning, that people have hopes and they have dreams. Our job is to think about ways that we can provide them the opportunity to live lives of dignity, and that includes sustainability, that includes economic inclusion, and protections for human rights.
Okay, well,
Thank you.
U.S.-France diplomacy here in action here at FII. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for now leaving the room for a few moments while we sanitize it. The program will resume shortly. Thank you so much.